So, I am going to talk a little bit about the evidence that surrounds telemental health services for youth. And really, one of the biggest key takeaways from this is that the research on services for youth is really lacking in the area of mental health. So, the population with the largest amount of evidence is really veterans. The good news is that research examining remote telemental health services with adults in the VA generally indicates that clinical activities transfer. Additionally, I know from that poll that a lot of you were concerned about engagement and attrition and things of that nature. And what that research says is that there really is and can be a strong therapeutic alliance, as well as low attrition and continued comfort with disclosure, even with the use of technology. Unfortunately, most of the studies that do exist on telehealth for youth are not very rigorous. So that means that the sample size tend to be pretty small. A lot of them are case studies in this area. And oftentimes, the studies that are produced don't have any type of comparison group. So while you can say this was effective, it's hard to know just how effective when you aren't comparing it to treatment as usual. So, as we walk through the following evidence, I just want you to remember that while this information is incredibly helpful, it really is preliminary and needs to be replicated in the future. So, we're all part of this learning. The good news is that telehealth treatment appears to be just as effective for the treatment of autism spectrum disorder, bulimia nervosa, depression, and PTSD. So I'm going to walk through each of these. So, when looking at autism spectrum disorder, one study noticed that remote clinicians felt just as capable of ruling in or out ASD diagnoses in 87% of their telediagnostic cases. Additionally, in this study, it reported that caregiver satisfaction with the telehealth process was incredibly positive. So that's really reassuring. Another study looking at many different types of research in this area found that video based telehealth was not only effective in diagnosing autism, but also in treatment. Again, the caveat here is that while this paper did review a lot of different studies, most of the studies are not that rigorous in their design. An additional study with a small sample of about 14 kids looked at parent training for youth with autism and comorbid disruptive disorders. Therapists were able to have a 98% fidelity to the manual in this study, and over 75% of participants demonstrated significant improvement. This study was a video based study, as are most of the ones I'll be speaking to today. So, looking at the treatment of eating disorders, the research here is primarily in the area of bulimia. So, one study indicated that face to face versus telemedicine CBT treatment yielded essentially the same results. So, post treatment abstinence was rated slightly higher for the face to face group, but this wasn't statistically significant. So, in general, they saw the exact same results with the groups. Additionally, and importantly, retention rates were almost exactly the same for the two groups. So, you weren't losing people due to lack of engagement in the services. And now looking at mood disorders, we'll start with depression. So there was no significant difference in face-to-face versus telehealth groups in the treatment of adolescent depression in one study. So about 82% of youth were remitted, whether they received face-to-face or telehealth services. Another study indicated that among adolescents with mild to moderate symptoms of depression, in a therapist guided remote CBT was just as effective as face to face. We don't really have information or evidence about more severe symptomatology, so that's important to note. But in this mild to moderate group, it appears that telehealth services are just as effective. And then looking at post traumatic stress disorder via video conferencing, there was no attrition and significant post treatment symptom reduction based on both caregiver and self report. This study was slightly limited due to a small sample size, again of 15 and no comparison group, but yielded preliminary, really positive results. So, with all those positives, it's also really important to recognize some of the clinical elements that can be challenging with a telehealth approach. So when we look at anxiety, there can be challenges conducting exposures via telehealth. This really comes in the way of being able to provide adequate structure and support for exposure activities. Again, video modeling can be leveraged to really teach relaxation strategies and support exposure completion. However, extra time may be required to teach parents how to best support their child with exposures as they're being done in the home. Additionally, another thing that comes up time and time again is being able to recognize and address suicidality when you aren't face to face with a client. So, this really comes up because sometimes, especially whether it's you're on the phone or on video, it could be hard to identify nonverbal cues. It can also be harder to read emotions. And then comes the situation of not really knowing how to handle emergency detainment or concern about whether there will be follow through if an emergency department admission is required. So, all of those things are important to keep in mind as when working with clients via telehealth.
Okay, so with the transition to telehealth, um, there are a lot of questions and considerations. I think we all know HIPAA rules have been relaxed by DHHS at this time with the pandemic and the really urgent need to move services to a telehealth platform. But that being said, the fundamentals of good clinical practice remain unchanged, and they should be in place regardless of how we're delivering services. Public-facing technologies are not recommended, and being a competent clinician doesn't necessarily translate into that you're a competent clinician doing telehealth. Not to say that those two can't exist together. And so there are some really wonderful resources I recommend if you haven't already, familiarizing yourself with them. I've listed some of them here. We will be providing these slides. And so the links are there for you. A lot of great resources from the American Psychological Association, the American Telehealth Association, and then there's another one around an article. It's a link to an article around a specific framework for telebehavioral health competencies. And the good news is that there's lots of wonderful telehealth platforms available that are HIPAA compliant. And I'm not getting any kickbacks from any of these ones. I'm just listing the ones here that seem to be the most common: Zoom for Healthcare, Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, Doxy.me, UpDoc, VC, and Google G Suite. We're using Zoom. That's the one I've been using most frequently, but I've heard from my colleagues these other platforms work well. Ideally they have a screen sharing capability and other sort of features that allow for you to work as interactively as possible with families and youth. So I'm going to transition now to just touching briefly upon concerns around privacy and confidentiality. It's not we've heard this, and some of you noted this as your top concern in that poll. And that is, that's a hallmark feature of the work that we do, is ensuring and protecting confidentiality and privacy. And so now that families are together for large segments of the day, they're often in close quarters, there can be some real challenges in finding a place where youth feel comfortable sharing freely with providers. It's helpful to talk about this right up front and troubleshoot with youth about, do they have a place that they can go to where they can shut the door, put a sign up, if possible, enlisting the help of caregivers, other family members. And then the next slide will illustrates or some create really unique, I think, ways that providers such as yourselves are finding ways to ensure privacy and confidentiality. So cars are wonderful places. I was just doing a webinar last week and was talking about this subject as well. And someone made a really good point. You know, they're soundproof, yet you can see in and out. Children can go if they have a backyard, garage, trampolines. If they can, if they're on the phone, they can perhaps take a walk around the block. And other ways that help to ensure privacy is a code word between a therapist and a client that might signal the need to stop talking about whatever they were at that particular moment, that, you know, that privacy can't be assured. And so that's a shared understanding between the therapist and the client. And then I also have here on the slide the chat function on many video conferencing platforms, a great way to allow conversations to continue without being overheard. You know, one of the considerations is important is to make sure that it's within the scope of a business agreement, a BAA, so it's considered HIPAA compliant. Like I know Zoom for Chat, this one, the chat feature is considered within that scope, and so is considered a HIPAA compliant service, which is hopefully a relief to people. But that can be a really nice way to continue the therapeutic process if there's you know, a temporary concern about privacy. And then, as many of you noted, that engagement and alliance is a real concern, and I've heard that repeatedly. And so, you know, I think it's important to note that there are, you know, and Lindsay even talked about this in terms of the research, that, you know, I think we can feel assured that we can maintain a engagement and alliance with clients via this telehealth platform. And you know, I'm going to be talking about this for the webinar. You know, ways in which engagement, I think, is enhanced. We know that it can increase access, and maybe some of you have already experienced this, that you know, families that maybe you wouldn't normally be able to engage in services at all, or weren't able to access services either through barriers, transportation, childcare, now are able to access services. So there's some health equity promotion, I think, that is a real advantage. I've also heard no-shows have dropped, although I was also on a webinar and hearing some variability around that. But it does seem like no-shows have dropped off for some providers. And it allows you to connect with clients in the setting, you know, in which they're living, that they might feel more relaxed and at ease, and that you get a perspective from for those of you who are providers into a client's world that you might not, you know, that you don't get through office-based care. And yet we do know, you know, there's challenges. The nonverbal, you know, we rely, if you can, not quite ready for that one, thank you, that they don't have access to, as providers, you don't have access to the nonverbal behaviors and information that we really rely on in our work. And, you know, going back to the health equity issue, as we've kind of, you know, maybe you've been on calls when you can't hear somebody, the screen is frozen, like I was experiencing, you know, so there could be unreliable, you know, unreliable internet, or maybe just even no access to any kind of internet, Wi-Fi, limited data plans, things like that. And then as I addressed around the privacy and confidentiality, you know, that's that can be a concern, especially around also like safety, you know, that because they're not physically in the same space as us, that you know, is, can create additional sort of challenges in assuring client safety, especially those, you know, who may be at greater risk. Okay, now, Anya, thank you. So these are just some general kind of considerations and recommendations. Doing a test run ahead of time before a session can, eliminate hopefully some of those problems and, resolve them ahead of time. For this webinar, we did a couple test runs ourselves to make sure that everything was in line. It can just help you be able to focus on the therapeutic relationship. Collecting information ahead of time, I'm going to be talking in more detail about that, but that, or actually one of my colleagues is going to be talking about that. And, for those of you who maybe tend to be more subdued in your therapeutic work, it might require more effort to really show your animation, show your excitement, that because of that the limited nonverbal data that's coming through. It requires more on the provider's end to be on. Unfortunately, that also I think is contributing to what is termed Zoom fatigue. I don't know if any of those of you on the call have experienced that. I know I have, but yeah, when we have to put in that much more effort than we normally would on a work day, it can be tiring for providers as well. And so all that's to say, that everything may need to get slowed down, and that's okay. Slowing down the evaluation process, slowing down the engagement, process if need to, building rapport, building the relationship, just may take a little bit more time. And that relatedly, the typical 50-minute session may need to be reconsidered during telehealth times. Doing shorter sessions, certainly with younger children, maybe seeing the family more frequently, but for shorter periods of time. So that's, I think the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't necessarily apply here. And that allows, I think the upside to that is some real responsivity that providers can provide to their families. And then finally, establishing some ground rules, starting your session the same way, hopefully in the same space, both you and the client, that they're upright. This is, again, aspirational. I know not necessarily what always happens, but that they're in a designated place, that's, this is the therapy, it's therapy time, I think helps everybody to cue into removing distractions. And, you might have to, again, in working with families, enlist sort of the caregivers in understanding that and helping, again, especially for younger kids, to provide, a designated space that is for therapy, behavioral health. All right. And then, yeah, I've already kind of touched upon this, but younger than age 7, it was really challenging to do, provide service via the telehealth platform. I know some places have stipulated they're actually not going to provide telehealth services for youth under this age, just because, developmentally, and you've got kids sort of walking around with the laptop going on all sorts of rooms, and it's just not very productive. So they may have to just pause and wait till in-person services are available. And then, I think this is true for in-person, office-based care, that the younger the kids are, the more the parents need to be involved and engaged. And certainly, the telehealth platform is no exception, that you really have to get have the caregiver. They may need to be there in the session for a longer segment of time, or maybe for the entire time. And as I said, shortening sessions, especially for this younger children, really would be recommended. And I've already talked about the structure, so I won't repeat myself, so we can move along. Okay, so as I said, we're lucky enough to have our wonderful colleagues share what they've been doing to help with these different processes. So We're going to hear from Lorraine Lynch, who's the clinical manager at CaseArc, about engaging families through, believe it or not, the paperwork process. And it looks like we're not hearing it. Anya, I think you have to optimize. There's a button when you share the screen to optimize media. While Anya's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and I would love for us to hear from Lorraine, but I can say that what she's done at her organization is they have created a HIPAA compliant encrypted link where they can email their intake paperwork to families. The families can complete them and return them back through the same platform. They use the Jot form platform. There's other ones as well. That's just one. And so what it allows for is, it sounds like families have really responded well to this, that it creates, it helps with efficiencies, and that the time can then be spent really connecting with the families, building that relationship, working on the engagement, and not have to worry about the forms and getting all that information, the intake information. So maybe we could move along.
Susanna, let me try to play this.
Okay.
My name is Lorraine Lynch. I'm clinical manager at King County Sexual Assault Resource Center in Renton, Washington. In order to increase engagement for new clients using telehealth, we send out the needed forms in a format that can be completed and sent back electronically. We use the encrypted and HIPAA compliant Jot form platform, but there are many others as long as you ensure proper HIPAA measures are met. This way, our time on the call with the client is not taken up with filling out forms or asking intake questions. We can concentrate on connecting with the client right from the initial contact.
Wonderful. I'm glad we were able to hear from Lorraine. Said it very wonderfully. Okay, we can go on to the next. And we can also use, for younger kids, speaking of kind of assessment and rating scales, this is just one example that was given to me by Allison Sands at Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center, having them identify how they feel about people who are in their circle of safety. And you can move on. Similarly, this is a rating scale for how youth feel before they're doing a behavioral activation. And what I'm just demonstrating here for you now is just how you might use the annotation feature on a video conferencing platform with the screen share, and they could be, sort of coloring that in the moment. And you can, get an idea of their mood or feeling either that day or sometime during the week. Now we get to hear from another colleague, not quite yet, Anya. So this is, again, another contribution from Milana Hardman, who is at CMAR in Vancouver, and offered some nice ideas around how, again, to build that initial engagement and relationship with clients.
Behavioral Health Child and Family Center in Vancouver, Washington. I have a couple tips today to share with you about engagement using the telehealth platform for CBT+. One thing I've talked to my team about is how to help people feel comfortable. One thing that we've talked about is maybe helping clients to introduce their pets to us and us introducing our pets to them. Most of us are working at home, so we have to keep it professional, we have to keep it private, but somehow having our pets on the screen and having them cuddle with us and introducing them to our clients, helping them to see a different side of us, helping our clients to feel safe and comfortable with their pets in their laps can help them to relax and help them feel a little bit more at ease using this awkward platform. Another thing we've talked about is joining with them in the awkwardness. None of us are great at this. We're getting better at it, but none of us are great at it. None of us are comfortable. Owning that with them can help them to feel, I'm not so great at it. Maybe I'm not the only one. So if my therapist isn't feeling comfortable with it, I'm good. I'm okay with it. Another thing we found is that the older teens are very concerned about their privacy. Being at home all the time, there's siblings around, there's older relatives maybe in the house, the walls are thin, they don't have privacy. We've invited them to take their phones. Most of them are using their phones for this platform. We've invited them to take their phones and take us on a walk. Take us on a walk outside. Show us your, or take us on a walk around your room. Show us your favorite poster or your project that you're working on. But take us on a walk. Maybe if you can go outside, get some exercise, show us your neighborhood, show us your environment that you live in. Walking and talking is so much easier sometimes for teens than it is to talk face to face. It relaxes them, it makes them feel a little bit safer. So that has been a great engagement piece. They come back because they feel a little bit safer. Being mindful and helping them to remember, well, if it gets too private or too hard to talk about, make sure there's nobody around that can hear. Put your earbuds in so that we have a more private conversation for this. Another thing we've talked about is slowing down the process, slow down that intake. You don't have to get it all done in one appointment. Get enough to get your diagnosis, get enough to get what you have to get your immediate paperwork done, but you can finish up the nitty-gritty of your paperwork on the second and third appointment. Get their backstory, get what you have to do, but join with them like we always do, but slow it down. The whole world is slowing down right now. They'll understand that, and they'll appreciate you taking the time to really get interested in what they're interested in. They'll like that, they'll appreciate it, and they'll come back. Another thing that we've talked about is retention. I have a clinician that is really good at this. When I asked her about what her secret is, she said she thought maybe it was just her humanistic approach, her humility. She tells them, I'm really uncomfortable with this. It's awkward. I'm not great at it. And so I hope you'll bear with me. And that helps them to relax because more times than not, she says they share with her, they're not good at it either. So they kind of laugh at it. They get through it together and they come back. They always come back. She doesn't have anybody drop off or leave or just discharge. So that's some of the tips I have. I hope it's helpful, and I hope that you have a safe journey through this pandemic and that we all can join together back in the same room very soon. Good luck.
All right, that was a wonderful contribution from Milana. Now, I'm going to be talking about kind of getting more into the specific components of different evidence-based practices, but hopefully you also see this issue of engagement is throughout, that a lot of these things that I'm going to be talking about and also hearing from other colleagues really has to do with engagement, really has to do with, like Milana said, retaining, getting those clients to come back and stick with it. So let's move along. So psychoeducation, we know this is an important part of much of the work that we do, regardless of the specific intervention or practice. And so one way, moving to the next slide, that, books can be, even though we're not in the same room, you can still use books, especially for younger kids. You know, there's anything from encopresis to trauma to anxiety. And you can, you know, read a book and, you know, provide psychoeducation via the telehealth platform. So we're going to hear from, I think, let's see, can you advance the slide? Yeah, so CJ Ellsworth, another wonderful colleague from CMAR, did a video demonstration for this, which is fantastic, showing how you might use a book. This is a Terrible Thing Happened, one of my favorite books for working with kids who've had trauma.
Okay. Okay. Hi, it's really nice to see you. So you're in a private space in your house right now, right? Where you're just able to talk to me?
Yep.
Privately? Okay, sounds good. So my name is CJ and I'm a counselor. One of the things that I do is I work with kids who have experienced some scary things that have happened to them. And I noticed that you're moving your camera a whole bunch. I'm wondering if there's a way that you can have it so it's still while we're working. Is that a good spot for it?
Is this better?
That's good, yeah. Thank you. It's just that it gets kind of hard when you're moving the phone or the tablet around a whole bunch, then it's hard for me to see where your face is. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So one of the things that we are going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about what trauma is. Do you know what trauma is? Do you know what that word means? What does it mean? You tell me.
It means kind of like a bad experience that you've had that's like kind of hurt your brain, and it makes you feel bad every time you've thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that can happen is it can make you feel a lot of different ways for a long time for some people, and for some people it might have just happened. And so there's different ways that people deal with bad things that happen to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and read a book to you. Do you see this book right here? Have you ever seen this book before, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay, it's called A Terrible Thing Happened, and it's about our friend Sherman Smith. So I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. And it talks a little bit about exactly what you said, that a trauma is something scary that has happened. We're going to learn a little bit about this terrible thing that happened to our friend Sherman Smith. Sherman Smith saw the most terrible thing. He was very upset. It really scared Sherman to see such a terrible thing. What does he look like in that picture? Kind of feeling?
Scared or frightened?
Yeah, maybe frightened. Sherman did not like feeling so afraid. He did not want to remember what happened. So Sherman decided not to think about the terrible thing he saw. Sherman thought that would make him feel much better. As you can see, he's kind of got his hands over his eyes and he's thinking about that terrible thing. Can you see what the terrible thing is?
No.
No. It just looks like a bunch of scribbles if you were here looking at the book right here.
All right, so that was an illustration. CJ actually, I hated she actually showed more, but I just, in the interest of time and wanting to show a range of components, just wanted to again give you that little snippet. So thank you, CJ, that was wonderful. And we can move on. Now this is this was from Allison Sands at the Harborview Abuse and Trauma Center. And she had a young client who was having to go to court and feeling quite nervous about it. And so she wanted to give her some information about what court is like, you know, who sits where. And so here's just this is a picture of a courtroom, and, you know, using the video conferencing platform, able to show this and, you know, talk through the different parts of the courtroom, and hopefully to give that information to reduce the youth anxiety. And then moving to coping skills, this can be anything from relaxation, affective regulation, cognitive coping. So very broad. There are some nice interactive games online. These again are just a couple. I know there's also, these are specific for psychoeducation as well as helping to promote the use of effective skills. There's also just, interactive games like Uno that can be done to sort of start a session before going into the agenda. And then I think I have a screenshot of the Guess What I'm Feeling. I wasn't able to animate this, but you can have the youth, match the emoji face, the feeling face to the feeling word, and that can help to elicit a discussion, a conversation about when they feel those feelings, what do they do, what helps them feel better, and that can all be done via the the video conferencing platform. And then, all right, another colleague. So this is from Louisa Hall, who's a clinical supervisor at Sound, and talking about all sorts of different ways that she has utilized the screen share, which I think is a fantastic strategy for engaging youth, but also for being able to implement some of these specific interventions. So if we go to the next screen, we'll hear her.
One of the ways I've been successful implementing TFCBT and CBT over telehealth, and that is using screen sharing. Screen sharing has allowed me to keep clients active and engaged in sessions throughout all the components. From assessments, where I've been pulling up a digital version of the assessment before the session and sharing it over the screen share option to review it with the client and keeping score at home on paper, to coping skills, where I've helped clients review resources about square breathing, also watch some videos that help time your breathing exercises with, say, the opening and closing of a flower. And so it's time so that if they regulate their breathing, so breathing in when the flower is opening and out while it's closing, it can help them regulate their deep breathing. So that's been one way that we've been able to be engaged with that. For feeling identification, there are some, there's a feeling charades game that is available through trauma, the TFCBT National Developers website, which I think is telehealthfortrauma.com, and there's a lot of great shareable resources there. One of my favorite things to do has been using the whiteboard option on the screen share for teaching the cognitive triangle. You can draw a triangle on there and use the text boxes to go through what thoughts, feelings, and behaviors the clients are having. And you can even change your text, which is exactly what I would do on the whiteboard in my office. You can change the color of your text to go one color for the original and unhelpful thoughts, and then change it to a different color for the helpful and more accurate thought. And it really helps the client see the process of the triangle, just like you would in the office. And so I've been having a lot of success doing that. And I have an example of a screen share triangle that I did. I took a photo of the whiteboard so that you could see that. And then also the parents allowed me to share the follow-up homework assignment that the client had completed. And she did a triangle about COVID-19 and how she was feeling about the safer at home order. So maybe we can all relate to it a little bit. And after she shared that with me, we were able to use the screen share option again to go through and come up with a more helpful and accurate thought, which unfortunately I did not take a picture of, but it was a great opportunity to do that. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Louisa. And hopefully people were able to see. Oh, can you just go back to that one on your, yeah, hopefully people can see down at the bottom left. That was the whiteboard that Louisa was referring to. This is the actual screenshot of that, and how it, thank you, and you're doing great, how the different colors refer to the kind of what we call an old triangle, sort of a thought that might not be helpful, might lead to distressing feelings, and then working with the youth to change that thought is in a different color, and then going through the CBT triangle. So I thought that was really nice. And then you can see the screenshot of the actual drawing that the youth did around the the one she talked about where she didn't get the second triangle, but that I thought was such a nice display of that this kid was really bought into this, that she was thinking about it outside of session. All right, so thank you, Anya. Now we can go on to the next one. And then this is just, thinking about where you could have a virtual therapy box or envelope, keeping something in a folder on a desktop, a HIPAA compliant sort of shared drive that, you can work off all the worksheets and materials that you're using, that you can all be sort of kept in one repository. Same thing with, I think for younger kids, that if there's things that you're using that you want them to have access to during your therapy work, that there is an actual, it could be a physical box where, that is your materials that you're going to use for therapy. All right. And then, for younger children, even though you're not there in person to maybe be, drawing pictures and utilizing art, you can still do that. It does require a little front end work and forethought, and enlisting the caregiver to perhaps make sure that those materials are available during your session. But, they could draw something, hold it up to the camera. They can show you different things on screen. That would require video as opposed to phone. Also, this picture of, blowing bubbles, that can be a nice way to, teach relaxation. Same thing with, having spaghetti or having a rubber band to show kind of how we feel when we're tense versus relaxed. Again, those are all things that just require some pre-planning, that the youth have, you have the same material. So maybe you would have, if you were doing the bubble blowing, you would have one, and then hopefully the youth would have one, and you could sort of do that simultaneously, although in separate physical locations. And then also, you can have children grab toys, like action figures, and have them act out something that happened, and I have a video demonstration of this coming up, where you could, you have your figures, at your workspace, they have theirs, and you can talk about what might be alternate solutions or, challenges, and sort of facilitate some of that problem solving. And I think we have, yep, so again, we have CJ Ellsworth making an appearance with demonstrating how to use the toys via telehealth around peer conflict. So if you just advance to the next slide, it should play.
So you were telling me about that argument that you had on the playground with your friends, and I see that you brought your toys. So go ahead and grab a couple of the toys. Just show me what happened on the playground.
Okay.
Wow, so a lot of kids, a lot of friends were there when this happened.
Most of them I didn't know about. I don't know, 9 or 8 of them.
So tell me what happened. Show me with your toys.
Okay, if this is him, his name is Steve, and this is me, and then this is some ever random kid who basically just annoyed him for no reason. And then this is about everybody else circling around us, yelling, fight. I didn't fight. I mean, why should I?
Yeah. But there were lots of people who were trying to encourage you to fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was just running around teasing him, then he tried to attack him, and I just stood right here and dodged if he tried to come at me. Then this recess teacher came along, and it broke apart.
So what do you think would have been a helpful thing for you to say to your friend so that it didn't get as far as everybody is all around you going, fight, fight, fight? What do you think is something that you could have tried with him before it got to that point? Oh, I see you're all done with your toys.
I don't know, maybe avoiding it altogether.
How would you have avoided it altogether?
All right, so thank you, CJ, for demonstrating how that would work. And we'll move to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about doing trauma-focused work via this platform. So, you know, one of the important parts of doing trauma-focused work is helping youth be more comfortable talking about the scary, confusing, dangerous things that happen to them, helping them to make sense of it. And we oftentimes do that through what's called a trauma narrative, through imaginal exposure. And I wanted to share, I don't have any kind of audio or video, but Oliver Birchwood Glover, who's a clinical supervisor at the health center in Walla Walla, was supervising a provider who was doing a trauma narrative through screen sharing and PowerPoint. And so the therapist created a PowerPoint and put in some prompts and questions that we would want to give to the youth to facilitate talking about and facing up to some difficult memories. And then they could illustrate it, with the whiteboard. You could even have avatars, different thought bubbles, all sorts of, make it as creative as you want. And in this case, with this provider, they pulled it up on their screen, did the screen share so the client could also see what they were working on. In this case, the provider typed in his answers to the prompts as he gave them verbally, and then the provider asked the client to illustrate it on paper. And then when he was done, he held it up to the camera so the provider could screenshot the drawing and then uploaded the drawing into the PowerPoint while still on the screen share. You're able to do this so that he could see, his illustration next to the narrative text right on the screen in real time. And so then what's great about it is you have a digital workbook authored by the client that could be sent to the client, uploaded to his chart. I don't recommend sort of putting the full trauma narrative in the actual medical record, but being able to, I think, have the youth and the provider sharing that together, and it sounds like it was very engaging. Again, some front end work, a little more technology, but able to do trauma processing. And then similarly, if you want to go on to the next slide. Louisa Hall was talking about a website resource that the developers created. And so that link is there in the upper left-hand corner. For those of you who are interested, they created a specific resource link just for telehealth. So I strongly encourage, if you haven't already checked that out, to do that. It's completely free. So what they've done, some of you may be familiar with the trauma-focused CBT workbook that we oftentimes use, again, when we're doing office-based work. And the developers turned it into a Word document that can be typed on, annotated on via the screen share. So this is another way that you could, do trauma-focused work via the screen share and telehealth platform. And so this is just a quick demonstration. There's also a wonderful app called Book Creator. I just did this, just a little example. It was kind of quick, but I don't know if people saw that it's a really awesome thing that you can, it's free. You create a book. Yeah, maybe Anya will show that, able to show that again. So there's my cover. I selected that online. You can upload pictures right within the platform. And then I just started to type, my little introduction. And, you could imagine you just add page and page. It's sort of similar to that PowerPoint idea, but then you actually get that final product, and you can do all sorts of things. Kids can draw on it, as well as typing in, or, you could work on that together interactively in a session. Thank you, Anyar. You're doing fantastic driving this train here. This is also included in the telehealth, and again, this is just demonstrating. This is through Sesame Street. This is on the National TFCBT website that is specific for resources specific for trauma and young children. And you can select on finding activity, you select the age range, you select how much time you want the activity to go, and then the type. So, range of activities, and then it will show you different activities. I thought this was really wonderful, and just a great resource, especially for young children who've experienced a range of traumatic events. They have some really nice resources for kids in foster care as well. Okay. And this is just another Sesame Street example. This is a video, again, talking about youth in foster care, and again, could be a nice interactive activity to do with a younger client. Okay, and see, we're gonna hear from CJ Ellsworth one more time. This is her demonstrating a fear ladder that we use when we're doing different exposures with youth. So if you wanna, and she's using the whiteboard.
This exercise is called a fear ladder. And you know how a ladder has all of these different steps or rungs to go all the way from the bottom to the top, right? There are the things that we are less scared of, so it's less scary. And then there are things up here, right, where it's the highest, where it's the most scary. So let's think about how you were telling me that the thing that is most scary to you is you're afraid to get in a car accident again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you go in the car with your parents ever? Oh, you disappeared, Bob.
Yeah.
Where'd you go? I can't see your face. Can you sit up so I can see your face?
Well,
And I'm gonna have you draw on the whiteboard too.
Okay, call me when you need me to.
Right now. Come on up, Bob. Okay.
What?
So what is the thing that is the next most scariest for getting into a car accident? Your mom told me that you're really afraid to get into the car. So where would that be on this ladder? Would that be like less scary thing, or is it closest to the most scary thing?
I'd say the bottom.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and you write it in there? Which rung does it belong on, getting into the car? Okay. So it's at the bottom, just getting into the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm gonna write that one down here. Get into the car is at the bottom of your list. So then what is something that is like you can get in the car, but what about when it drives around your neighborhood? Is that something that really scares you? Is that more scary? Is it getting close to the top of the ladder? Where would that be?
No, still near the bottom. I'm only scared if there's another car in sight.
Ah, okay. So those are at the bottom. You feel like, you know what? I could totally get in the car and I could drive around the neighborhood. That wouldn't be a problem at all. But if I'm gonna go and drive on the main road with other cars, then how does that make you feel?
There's an E.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you. So how would that make you feel?
That would probably be second to top.
Second to top. Okay, so we will move that right here. Okay, drive with the other, like the main road with other cars. But getting into the car and driving in the neighborhood, that's something that just lives down here at the bottom. You feel like I can do that no problem, right?
Yep.
What's something that's kind of medium? What's the next thing that could be maybe makes you a little nervous, more nervous, but it's not like as scary as being on the main road with other cars? What do you think that would be?
Driving on the road with bikes.
Okay.
All right, that was a fantastic illustration, not only of how you can use the whiteboard, but how you can engage the youth and it be a two-way process. And how she was able to move, she was typing in as he was talking, but he could also use the annotation, and then you can move the different, move the rungs on the ladder depending on what the child says. So that was fantastic. All right, and we are just have a few more slides, and then I know people have been, there's some questions that we're gonna be able to have our panel hopefully address. So please submit those if you haven't done so through the Q&A function. This is an example of, again, speaking of exposure, this might be something to, this is like a fear ladder, but for younger kids, the different steps, hopping down the worry path. This could be, thinking about how to engage parents with younger kids. This could be something shared with them as well and help them to participate in that exposure process. And so in terms of parenting, I think remote technology really fits in nicely with parenting interventions. It allows you to see parents and children in a more naturalistic environment, and you can provide real-time feedback and coaching to parents around challenging behaviors. An intervention, parent-child interaction therapy is actually based on that. And my colleague, Allison Sands, who I mentioned earlier, she was working with a mother and a 4-year-old girl in PCIT. And initially, and some of you probably can relate to this, the child was very cooperative, everything was fine, but right at the end, when they were finishing up, the child threw her first sort of for real tantrum. And it provided an opportunity for Allison to coach the mom through that right there in the moment. That wouldn't, what we sometimes see in the office that we coach parents through, we can do remotely as well. And then this is to illustrate, with younger kids, specifically around talking about difficult memories, traumatic memories. We oftentimes, younger kids, how we all learn to regulate ourselves, regulate our emotions is in the context of our early parent-child relationships. And so it can be helpful to have parents there available, and maybe how the child regulates themselves is going to sit on mom's lap and asking for a hug. They could also sit on the lap when they're talking about, a scary memory, and that provides, promotion of the relationship, as well as being able to help children through that distressing memory. Okay, these are references for anybody who's interested. Most of them are from Lindsay's slides with the research. And then I believe we are ready for the Q&A if you want to. Yeah, great. So again, our panelists, hopefully they've been able to join us. We've been seeing and hearing from them throughout this webinar, and I'm just so grateful that they're willing to be here in person as well. So CJ Ellsworth from CMAR, Louisa Hall from Sound, Milana Hardman from CMAR, and Lorraine Lynch, I think, should be on the call, and we'll be able to unmute. So let's see, I think Lindsay has been collecting some questions. Lindsay, did you want to?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
Let's kick it off. So
Great.
One of the first questions is, I love the idea of supporting teens in their need for privacy. Has there been consideration of how to support teens who have a significant lack of privacy in their home, such as smaller spaces or don't feel comfortable going outside?
So CJ, Louisa, Milana, Lorraine, any of you want to field that one? And you might need to unmute them. Okay, are we? It sounds like, I don't know if they are not available or just we're not hearing from them.
CJ just raised her hand, so if just someone unmutes her.
Oh, great.
Milana has done the same.
Excellent. Okay. So can we unmute? So how about we'll hear from CJ and then Milana. So CJ, how about we hear from her?
Amy, could you please unmute her? Yeah.
So Amy's not able to do that.
Georgiana, you should be able to do it because you're.
I'm doing it. I've got it, guys.
Thank you.
Everyone should be okay.
This is CJ. Can you hear me now?
Ah, yes.
Yes, great. Thank you guys. I'm sure
Thanks for everyone's patience. Appreciate it.
it's always tricky figuring these things out. I just want to say that I think that's a really important question, and it's one of the first things that we talk about when we start sessions with kids in their homes. We talk, when they're younger than 13, we're certainly having that conversation with the parents, and we're talking with them and problem solving at the very first sort of engagement with them about what's a private space for this child to be in. And what I will say is, more often than not, the parents are pretty great about making sure the kid has a private space. But what we do notice as a theme is that parents will often be nearby and they will start answering for their child. So it's been kind of a great moment to say, hey, invite the parent to come in. Or talk to the parent and say, I really want to hear from you. I really need to hear from kiddo first. And if you're tempted to answer them, maybe it would be good for you to be in a separate room altogether. And doing a lot of those problem solving conversations pretty open, frankly, is important to do right up front. And I think it's a good point about if they're older, they don't feel comfortable going outside and having that conversation. We've had kids who are like, maybe I'll be in my closet and I'll just talk sort of quietly, but we just try to problem solve with them about what are the options and what's available to them. So I know it's not a perfect answer, but I would say just making it really an open, immediate conversation to have with the kid, and know you'll have to go back to it a few times.
Thank you, CJ. So Milana has raised her hand, and I also, Louisa is here and raised her hand. So Milana, how about you? You want to field that question, and then we'll turn it over to Louisa.
I'm not, can you hear me?
Yep, we
Oh,
can.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something that my clinicians have really struggled with, and myself too. I've got a few teens on my caseload. One of the things that we've done is, of course, encourage them to use their earbuds. But I just lost my train of thought. We've encouraged them, like I said in the video, to take walks. But if they're unable to take walks, my clinicians have used the chat option. You know, when people are walking by or they don't want to be heard of what they're saying, to use the chat option. But some of my clinicians have gotten very creative, and the need to be flexible. A lot of the kids have asked, can I just text you and let you know when my mom goes grocery shopping, or when my you know, my dad's at work on his computer in the other room, can I talk to you on my computer during that time? Or when I'm done with my schoolwork and I have a break from my school and my parents think I'm still doing my schoolwork, can we have a session then? So some of my clinicians have been very flexible in their scheduling so that they can kind of catch kids on the fly, so to speak. And that has worked out really well. I know it's not a perfect solution, but if they can do that, that's been very helpful for some of these kids. Because scheduling around the computers and scheduling around their parents' schedules, just for that privacy factor, has been really tough.
Great, thank you. And thanks so much, Milana. And then Louisa, looks like you raised your hand, so I'm going to give you hopefully permission that we can all hear you now.
Okay. I partly raised my hand because I just wanted to let you know I was here.
Awesome, thank you.
You guys have done a great job describing. I mean, I think we in downtown Seattle have some of the same issues, or, you know, privacy issues and less options, you know, less safe to be outside right now, less families with cars or trampolines or any of those things that are an option. I think the chat function has been really great. And I think it's required a lot of flexibility from clinicians to help be that voice for clients. So, you know, I've had some cases where siblings would come in the room and the client would be a little hesitant to push back and say, oh no, it's fine if they're here. And the therapist is really needed to be the one to kind of make sure that space is held for privacy. So that's my input.
Great, thanks, Louisa. So how about other questions? We have 10 more minutes.
Yep, so let's move on to another one.
Great.
So one person asked, thoughts on how to encourage children to talk about tough topics, specifically how to keep them engaged in the process and not shut down.
That's a great question. I use drawing a lot, and I use Play-Doh a lot. I use Play-Doh to have them sculpt what they're thinking or sculpt what they're feeling. I know CJ has some wonderful ideas, very creative, CJ. But I use Play-Doh an awful lot, and I use drawing an awful lot. So if they can't find their words, I have them draw or color what it is they're feeling. And sometimes that's kind of an abstract thought for them. So we'll do collaborative coloring or collaborative drawing. And it doesn't have to make sense to them, but we have a conversation afterwards about what it is they came up with. Sometimes
Hi.
I open a conversation. Go ahead.
Oh, great.
Sorry.
We have Lorraine. Great. Lorraine Lynch from K-Stark. Please.
Yeah. Sorry for jumping on there. I would say that, you know, we try to be as interactive as possible and encouraging and reassuring. And we will, you know, if we're working on a trauma with the child, we often are talking about how they would like to do that. Some kids want to color and narrate to us while we're typing it up on the shared screen, and then they'll hold the picture that they've drawn up to the camera. we can take a picture of that, and we'll add that to their book that they're making and share that with them the next week. We use the chat box feature a lot in Zoom, especially with teens. So going back to that privacy question. So if a child is not feeling comfortable saying these things aloud, we'll often start with the chat box, and then we will read it back to them. So again, a little bit of exposure, and maybe they can't say it yet, but we can say it for them and they can hear us say it. And we may use a PowerPoint presentation. So we're trying to make it as interactive and personal as possible. So those are some ideas.
Thank you. And we're so thrilled that we have so many questions. What we're going to ask is we'll hear from one of our panelists, as much as we'd love to hear from everybody. So feel free to raise your hand or chime in for the next question, and then we'll just limit it to one response.
And so the next question is, how can you set boundaries with a client that likes to play with Zoom settings, such as mute, unmute, video on and off?
I will jump in there if I can, because I had that happen to me on my very first Zoom session. You can go into the settings and select host only has the ability to control the screen, because I quickly had a child take over the screen and I couldn't get control back. So you can look around in the settings and set that up before you start your telehealth session with a client.
Great. Another question is, when a client only has the option for phone teletherapy, what are some helpful ways to build engagement with a client that struggles with these phone sessions?
Who wants to take that one? Louisa.
I mean, I think it's definitely more challenging over the phone than the video option, no doubt. I think if it's a possibility to get resources to them over the phone, or either via email, which might not be an option if they don't have access to phone or video chat, but if you can email them some resources and some like sheets that you're going to be working on, or mail them to them if it comes to that, to be able to have some resources for them to kind of work with you on. I think also sort of brainstorming with them what's going to work for them. You know, they've probably been doing some online learning or some other way that they've been engaging over the phone, and what are some things that they do? Like, could they have a stress ball with them, or like a fidget thing, or a rubber band that they play with in their hand while they're kind of talking to you, to help them stay a little bit more engaged. I think, I think there's probably an age limit in which a phone session it would be a really big challenge but I think for some of the older kids, you can brainstorm some solutions for them, send out some resources beforehand that they can have, that you can review together.
Great, thank you for that. And a few people have asked about sleep, so I'm going to try to summarize this into one question. But so working with middle schoolers and running into the challenge of those requiring the most support right now being ones who have sleep schedules that are off due to routine disruption. Sessions scheduled during the daytime hours are often missed due to staying up all night and sleeping during the day. Any advice on this?
I think clearly it's already difficult to engage a middle schooler, particularly if they're asleep. So I think if that was happening continuously with a case, I would see if there was some time that I could brainstorm with the parents and spend some time engaging around the importance of sleep hygiene. I mean, I think when this whole thing first started, we had sound sort of, when we thought it was just for a couple of weeks, in those glory days when you just thought it was going to be for a couple of weeks, we really stressed sleep hygiene as an important thing. And so if there's a way to brainstorm with parents how to help kids get back on a awake at least at some point during daylight, it would be a really important conversation to have with the parents. And I think for kids who've just been difficult to reach out to for a number of reasons, doubling down on our parent work has been our next step.
And I just have to echo what Louise is saying, really, with the difficult to get a kid on a regular schedule, period, and now pandemic life, getting them on a regular schedule, it's incredibly challenging. And so trying to figure out how can we pull in the additional supports and or motivations, trying to find something that will motivate a kid to get out of bed and to adapt to a more quote unquote regular sleep schedule, or just talking with them about, okay, you might be more of a night owl, but let's make sure that you're trying to get in, your minimum required sleep. Talking with them about, like, is there something that you could reward yourself with if you are doing a great job with your sleep, and trying to figure out different ways to set them up for success.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And this one also came up a couple times. So curious if there's any suggestions or strategies for doing telehealth with teens that have high risk behaviors over technology, such as talking to older individuals online, not being able to have unsupervised access, and navigating the trust and confidentiality within sessions.
I don't know if I have a total answer for this, but I know we had a younger client who was engaging and she got out of one of her school rooms, her school Zooms early, and so she used the extra time to be looking at inappropriate websites. And the mom had set the limit of, well, you're going to have to have everything's going to have to happen in front of me now. And so that was an example of the clinician thinking about the privacy issue, on their feed about, let's talk with mom about, can she be in a private space, and when this meeting is over, she'll bring the laptop back, so there's not like concern that she's going to spend extra time when you're not focused with her on a screen, that where she shouldn't be. And I think there's also a lot of information in the telehealth website, or a webinar that happened a couple months ago about TFCBT programs that were done, start over telehealth even before COVID. And, they talked about making sure to have phone numbers of people in the house that that you could reach if, if there's some problematic behaviors or risky behaviors going on during your session, so that you could reach out and call to get some help during that session. Other people may have other ideas. I know you limited to one, but I hate for that to be, if someone has a better idea, I'd love to hear it.
If anyone has, if anyone has something additional to say.
I think just to really echo again what Louisa said, trying to make sure that we have the opportunity to get the parents involved when possible and when appropriate for safety reasons, and really drilling down what the expectation is for therapy. There are a lot of norms that we don't have inside of telehealth, and so establishing those is pretty important. And we really just have to make sure that we take the time to address them as they come up, and know that we won't have nearly as much control as we would in the four walls of the office we would normally need in. So really setting ourselves up for success, having those support and caregivers involved when necessary, and really being clear with the adolescents about what's expected from them.
Thank you, CJ. And yeah, and those competency resources that I included in some earlier slides, there's lots of great guidelines and resources for sort of best practices. We are at time. I'm so thankful for the wonderful questions that you asked. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and engagement in the webinar. And of course, many thanks to our distinguished panelists for their wonderful insights and the contributions that they gave to this webinar. I'm going to let Anya follow up with some information about where to find the recording of the slides. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Anya.
Thank you, Georgiana, Lindsay, and our panelists for this great webinar. We'll have a recording saved on our YouTube channel, and the link will be posted on our website. So this is our website address. You should be seeing on your screens. Write it down so that you can have access to this video later. And I would also like to say that we would like to hear some feedback from you regarding this webinar, how it went. So as soon as we finish this webinar, another screen will pop up and you'll have a chance to fill out a short survey. And please let us know how it went, because we would like to improve our future webinars. Speaking of future webinars, we will have a series of webinars for reporting of EBPs and the reporting guide specifically that our institute develops each year. So those ones are coming up in summer. We don't have yet dates, but we will be announcing those through our newsletter. So if you registered for this webinar, you'll be able to get that announcement in your email inbox. And this is it from me. So thank you very much. We'll stop sharing our screen. And
great. And Anya, there was a question. Should there be a .edu after the website, or is that the full link?
This is the full link to our website. So it's www.ebp.institute. I know it's a little weird website link, but that's what it is. And that's how you can access it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Friday.
You too.
Thank you.